let's continue in these fundamentals for the Sunni intellectual. We have reached the book of ignorance. Because we finished talking about, we covered the book of knowledge. We finished all of what we wanted from the book of knowledge. And what's contrary to knowledge is ignorance. That even includes speculation. Because when you have a speculation, which is your supposition, and what you surmise to be correct, you still might not be correct. Even though it could be, based on your clues, could be that the likelihood of your being incorrect is so small, so unlikely, but you still acknowledge your room for error. From there, we talked about legal ijtihad. Yani, the word legal here is being translated from the Arabic word shar'i. This is what is called ijtihadun shar'i. That's what Abu Hanifa, Malik, Ash-Shafi'i, and others perform. And now we want to talk about Ijtihad for the Qiblah. Before we talk about Ijtihad for verifying news, what is the Ijtihad to remind you? It is your greatest effort to arrive at what's correct. And you are making this effort for your lack of definitive evidence. You're going to make ijtihad for the Qiblah because of lacking definitive evidence. Like we said right here, if the issue that lacks indisputable evidence, because there's two types of evidence, dalil qat'i, definitive evidence, what's called right here indisputable evidence, and dalil dhanni, speculative evidence, which is going to be then disputable evidence. And you might wonder, how is there such a thing as a disputable evidence? And how is there such a thing as speculative evidence? How is it evidence if it doesn't make you arrive at what's definitive and indisputable? The answer is that it would be evidence for something. Something might be evidence for something else. It is for sure evidence for something. But what that something is, that's what's questionable. It's not a question if this issue at hand is evidence. It is evidence. But what it leads to is what's disputable. And therefore, the evidence is a disputable evidence or a speculative evidence. Like in this case, you don't see the Kaaba. And you're not an expert at using the North Star. And you're not an expert at using a tested compass. The word tested is there for accuracy here. Not any compass, a tested one. So you're going to use something to get you to your answer. You're going to use the North Star, but you're not an expert at it. And you're going to use a tested compass, but you're not an expert at it. And so it is evidence. This North Star is evidence. And this tested compass, it is evidence. But it's because you're not an expert, not strong enough to get you to an indisputable answer. So if the issue that lacks indisputable evidence is facing the Kaaba, which means you cannot see the building with your own eyes. That's broad though. It's not only that you can't see the building with your own eyes. It is possible to not see the Kaaba with your own eyes and still have definitive evidence of your direction that you're facing. Because of being such an expert with the North Star, for example, that you might be someone, you have enough knowledge, enough experience, enough expertise to really give you 100%, and the right circumstances also to really give you 100% result from that North Star. But let's say you lack that, which is, I think that's the case for most of us. We're not that sharp with the North Star. But just for simplicity's sake, we're going to say it this way. You can't see the building. That's going to help you to conceive lacking that definitive evidence. So if the issue that lacks indisputable evidence is facing the Kaaba, so let's adjust the words here. Such as, let's say here, such as an inability to see the building with your own eyes. Such as an inability to see the building with your own eyes, then what do? You take the word of someone who can see it, if he is trustworthy. That's closer to knowledge, in this case, than making your ijtihad. The word of a trustworthy person who can see it, because if he can see it, that means he has what? He has knowledge. He sees it with his sound senses, and he's trustworthy, and he's informing you of what you cannot see. This is stronger than your determination, your ijtihad. And if you lack that also, so you neither can see the building, and you're not an expert in using the North Star or a tested compass, nor do you have a trustworthy person who sees it informing you of the proper direction, then you're going to make ijtihad, using only the valid ijtihad proofs. The strongest of those being the North Star by consensus. I remember back in the early 2000s having many debates about this issue, and brothers who were daring to deny that the North Star is the strongest Qibla proof by consensus. And there are still people who are audacious enough to claim that the strongest Qibla proof they claim is the sun over the Kaaba. And that's so easy to pull apart. And those valid Qibla proofs do not include the shape of the earth. Because how does a shape give you a direction? Think about that if you need to think about that. How does a shape give you a direction? So whoever has an answer for that, then let him give his answer. How do we determine directions? In reality, we determine directions by the sun and the North Star and other signs that Allah created. And in reality, we don't determine directions by latitude and longitude lines. Globe or a map that's not a globe, it doesn't have a sun and it doesn't have a North Star. It's not the real earth that we live on. It's a representation. And being a representation, it's not the real earth we live on, and not having a sun or North Star, then you need something else for this representation to also represent the directions. So there's going to be on a map or a globe lines, latitude and longitude lines. These are not the Qibla proofs. We don't have those in this real earth. You're not going to go to a place and there's a line just on the ground, which is a coordinate for the earth. The shape of the earth is not a proof for the Qiblah. And the latitude and longitude lines, they are not a proof. Rather, they are something for reading the globe or the map that you're using. And the globe is a map. So on this real earth upon which we live, what are you going to use for the Qiblah? Not the shape of the earth, not latitude and longitude lines. You're going to use the sun and the North Star and other things. The weakest sign of the Qiblah is the wind, because it fluctuates. The strongest sign is the North Star because it is stable, consistently in the same place every day, every night. In between those two is a sign like the sun. It doesn't fluctuate like the wind, and it's not as stable as the North Star. But the sun, where does it rise from? You know, it rises in the east and it sets in the west. But it doesn't rise from the same spot every day, and it doesn't set in the same spot every day. So you might not be an expert at using the sun to determine your direction. So that when you see the sun, you might not know when you see the sun how far off of due east are you. You don't have enough expertise. So then you have to acknowledge your room for error. You don't have indisputable evidence that you're facing the 100% exact direction to the exact degree. Nor the shortest distance between towns. That's not a Qibla proof. Because distance doesn't give you a direction. Yani, distance is not direction. You can't face a distance. You don't face a distance. For example, if someone told you face the wall, then it doesn't matter whether you're right in front of the wall or you're as far away from the wall as you can be. Like if you're right, your toes are right at the wall, and your nose is right at the wall, or you're all the way at the extent of the other extent of the room, for example. You're still facing the same direction regardless of the distance here. That's a small example, but it's a consistent example. The distance is not a proof for the Qibla. Yani, the distance does not give you a direction. Or the distance is not a direction. You don't use the shortest distance between towns. You don't say this from here to here is shorter. Therefore, this is the direction. You know, some people have a fallacy. They would say, for example, in North America, you have to face towards the east. Yani, in the Western Hemisphere, what's called hemisphere, you have to face towards the east with either northeast or southeast, depending on where you are in the Western Hemisphere. So someone would say, okay, east part, yes. They would say, let me show you why the distance does matter. Because how are you facing east, whether northeast or southeast or due east, how is it that you're facing east? He's going to say to you, because if you go east to get to Mecca, you're going to get there quicker than if you go west and go all the way around the world and come to Mecca from the other side. That's longer. They say that's why we know the distance matters, because they would say the way you knew that you should face east here is because it's the shorter distance. Because you could get to the Kaaba if you go west and come all the way around the world. That's what they say. A lot of people, they don't know how to answer that. I would say to that person, that's a theory. And then he's going to think I'm a moron. I say, what do you mean that's a theory? That's a fact. I'll tell him, did you ever do it? Did you ever go west and get to the Kaaba? Did you ever, from North America, go west and get to the Kaaba? He's going to say, no, he never did. Okay. But he's going to say, oh, you can't argue that. You can't say just because I never did it. Okay. Do you know anybody who did it? Anyone? Can you name any person who went west in North America and got to the Kaaba? No, you don't know a single person. So where you get this talk from? So then he's going to say, look, if you look on the globe, okay, that's what she said. If you look on the globe, did you ever do it though? No. Do you know anybody who ever did it? In reality, I'm not talking about the globe. I'm talking about the earth we live on here. This earth we live on. Do you know anybody who ever did that? No, you don't. You never did it. You don't know anyone who ever did it. You never saw it or anything like that. So it's just theory on your part. You theorize because you looked at this globe that if you went west, you could get to the Kaaba. You theorize, you imagine that if you were in North America and then you went west, you could get to the Kaaba by coming all the way around and then coming from the other side. So you might say to me, can you prove that you can't? I would say, then I don't have to prove that you can't. You can't prove that you can. I'm not even arguing that this is the thing to do. You're the one who's arguing that this is the right way and you can't test it. So yeah, I can test it. I'll tell him test it then. Test it, and then when you test it and you do it, get back to me and then present yani repeat your argument to me. Tell me again after you physically literally did it, so that I won't be able to argue with you that you're just theorizing. In the meantime though, you're only theorizing. So then let's say he says, well, how do you think we know that east is the right way if it's not because you can get to the Kaaba faster by going east? And that question right there shows you that he doesn't know what he's talking about. He has not learned religious rules. Because if he learned religious rules, then he wouldn't ask this question. Because the answer to this question is the reason why we knew east is the right way is not because of how far or short a distance is, because where the sun rises first. You have to use the religious proofs to determine the Qiblah, not theories. The sun rises at the Kaaba before it rises where we are. And the sun rises in the east. The sun rises in the east. That's one premise. Here's second premise. The sun rises at the Kaaba before it rises where we are. When you put those two premises together, then what's your conclusion? Therefore, the Kaaba is in the east. Now, that's definitive. That's not a theory. So you have to use valid ijtihad proofs, and Nawawi said so. He said, لا تصح إلا بأدلتها. The Qibla, ijtihad for the Qibla, that is not valid except by its proofs. Its proofs means not any proofs. Adillatiha, that statement, its proofs, that's qualified there. It's like saying the proofs. It here is as strong as the word the. It's not valid except by the proofs. It's not valid except by its proofs. And if you are unable, because you are blind, yani you're unable to make ijtihad, so you don't have a definitive knowledge, such as seeing the building, nor do you have a trustworthy person who sees it and therefore has knowledge informing you, nor are you able to make an ijtihad using the valid proofs because you're blind or you're a small child, then it is valid to be directed by a trustworthy, knowledgeable person. He'll take you by the shoulders and say, like this. Or he'll say to his little child who just became mumayyiz and started praying and can't yet determine the Qiblah on his own, he'll say, like this, face this way. And that's valid. But these rules for determining the Qiblah, you don't have to be an adult. You don't have to be a scientist. You could be a child. You might be a Boy Scout and you would know how to do this. All it takes is some learning. And you don't have to be literate. You need to be able to see. And you need to, for example, know what the sun is, which everybody knows what that is. And you need to be able to determine the North Star, for example. If you don't know how, then you learn. You ask someone. You go to a person and say, can you teach me, please, how to identify the North Star? And then he'll teach you. And then you'll know after that. And one's prayer is invalid if he skips a step. So if he imitates anyone, while able to make ijtihad, his prayer is invalid. And if he makes ijtihad, while able to take the word of a trustworthy person who sees the Kaaba, his prayer is invalid. And if he takes the word of a trustworthy person who sees the Kaaba, while he can see the Kaaba himself or otherwise have knowledge of it, then his prayer is invalid. If you have a question about that, feel free. Repeat which part? So last part I said was, here, one's prayer is invalid if he skips a step. So then I worked backwards through these dots here, these points. So If you imitated a person while you're able to make your own ijtihad, your prayer is invalid. Like what? Like you just went into a musalla or a masjid and you made no determination on your own. It's not an old one, also. It's not an ancient masjid that has a verified Qiblah over the centuries. And you just went in the building and just faced whatever way the people were facing. Or you were traveling and you stopped at one of those stops on the highway, one of the rest stops on the highway, and you saw a group of Muslims. You said, "Oh, I need to pray. I'm going to go pray with those Muslims." And all you did was just stand in the line and face the way they face with no determination on your part. So that means you're imitating. You're imitating while able to make ijtihad. Your prayer is invalid. And if you made an ijtihad while you have a trustworthy person who can see the Kaaba telling you the right direction, your prayer is invalid. And if you took the word of a trustworthy person who could see the Kaaba, instead of using your knowledge of the Kaaba, such as seeing it yourself, then your prayer is invalid. That's clear? Okay. Abdul Qawi, you said, meaning it's still your obligation? I'm not sure what you mean there. Ameen wa fikum. Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. It's his obligation to make determination for the Qibla if he can't see it and he doesn't have a trustworthy person who sees it telling him. So let me know if I didn't answer your question. You're welcome. Now let's talk about ijtihad for verifying news. So the word verify here, as if the word verify means to determine that it's true. Is that what we're going to do here? Determine that this news is true? And if so, how can we do that if we're making an ijtihad? Doesn't ijtihad only lead you to a speculation? Isn't it that if you make a valid ijtihad and you put forth your great effort, you only think you're right and you still have room for error? Yes, that's right. So, Yani, for now I'm going to keep the word verify here, but you need to understand, though, that we're saying this news that reached you, even if you go by it, since you're making it an ijtihad here, even if you go by this news that reached you because of your ijtihad, you have to still acknowledge your room for error, that maybe, possibly, this news is false. But depending on your clues, you're going to say, I don't think it's false. In fact, I'm throwing that out the window altogether. Falsehood is not even. I think I'll be naive if I think that's false, for example. But it could be false, but I really don't think so. I'm not even going to regard it as false. So, O meticulous Muslim, know that information conveyed by a single person does not necessitate knowledge. A single person, we're not talking about the Prophet himself here, alayhi salatu wassalam. Someone other than the Prophet, alayhi salatu wassalam, he tells you something. So it might be true, it might be false. Doesn't necessitate knowledge, doesn't demand that now you know. Sometimes some people say, what if somebody's saying something wrong about the religion and then I tell them what's right and then they still deny it? Should I deem him as a kafir? You're not going to deem him as a kafir here necessarily because he didn't believe you. And some people still follow up to say, but I told him. Yeah, even if you told him, doesn't mean that he believes you. You are a single person. Information conveyed by a single person does not necessitate knowledge. He's still skeptical about what you're saying to him. So don't deem him as a kafir because he doesn't believe you. Rather, yani, instead of it necessitating knowledge, if if it fulfills the conditions of acceptance. If this information, or if you want the word news or information, if it fulfills the conditions of acceptance, which we're going to talk about inshallah, it necessitates application. Application. That means acting, going into action. You get some news, and then could be true, could be false, but depending on the clues, you're going to jump into action for this news. So it's important then that you have discretion and you know really what is a reliable source, or else you're going to take from an unreliable source and think it's a reliable source. Hence, if the chains of the hadiths narrated about purification, prayer, fasting, hajj, zakah, and the like were authentic, if those chains were authentic, it would be obligatory to apply those hadiths. Not to believe that the Prophet ﷺ worded them in that way. This is not definite knowledge that he said those hadiths in that exact way. So that's for the Prophet ﷺ, and yani, in a practical sense, I mean, like in your own personal life, you're going to do similar to that. So someone's going to tell you something, and then you're going to act on that, although it might be false. Like your friend's going to come to you and say, "Oh man, I just got jumped by those guys around the corner." And you say, "What? All right, come on, let's go." Maybe he provoked the whole thing. Maybe he did get jumped, but maybe he provoked the whole thing. Or maybe he didn't get jumped, and he just wants somebody to come around here with him. Or maybe he for sure wouldn't tell you something like that. That's if it's not true. So you're just gonna take it. But when you have this knowledge, you're still gonna say to yourself, "This friend of mine, he would never lie about something like that. But it is possible that this is false." Therefore, a report from an individual could be true. Yani, don't say it's not true because it's only one person. And a report from 2 or more individuals could still be false. 2, 3, 4, 5 could still be false. As long as it is not a mass narration. Because of the possibility of error in it, even if only due to absent-mindedness or forgetfulness. The error doesn't have to be malicious. And just as it is possible for the honest, accurate one to lie or be mistaken, when we say it's possible for the honest one to lie, I posed this question to you last week. Isn't it possible for the honest one to tell a lie? And then I gave you the answer. Yes, it is. So what if someone said, no, it's not? How is it possible for an honest person to lie? Because then he wouldn't be honest. So the meaning of this, when we say the honest person, means usually honest. So just to make this even more accurate, ever more accurate, let's put the word usually in parentheses there. The one who's usually honest, the one who's consistently honest. Isn't this one who's consistently and usually honest? Isn't it possible that he could lie? Yes. And the accurate one, is it possible for the accurate one to be mistaken? Same thing. Someone might say, how he could be mistaken, then he wouldn't be accurate. So the meaning is the same here. This means the one who's usually accurate, the one who's consistently accurate. It's possible that he could be mistaken. So just as it is possible for the honest one, the honest, accurate one, to lie or be mistaken, it is also possible for the liar or usually inaccurate one to be honest and correct. So isn't it possible? Same thing. Isn't it possible that a liar could tell the truth? Yeah. That means he's usually a liar. He's known to be a liar. And the one who's usually inaccurate, May Allah protect us. Some people like that. Even some people who teach the religion, they make a lot of mistakes. Couldn't he be correct sometimes? Yes. Then, if this is the case, that the honest, accurate one could lie or be mistaken, and the liar or inaccurate one could be honest or correct, then we need some conditions. We need some principles to uh, adhere to so that we can sift accurate news from inaccurate news, reliable news from unreliable news. Yeah, verifying works here. So the conditions of acceptability are 6. Continuity of the chain. That means there's not a gap in the narrators. I think that's known to you, especially if you've been studying religion for a while. You know what this means. But let me tell you an example. Something that I saw not too long ago. Y'all heard of Dr. Martin Luther King? Maybe you did. If you're American, you probably heard of him. Dr. Martin Luther King. And he was a civil rights advocate back in the 60s. He was a reverend, Christian preacher. Okay, so you know who he is. So now, that was 60s. 60s was how many years ago? Like 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, 2010s, even 2020s, like 60 years ago. Now, like within maybe last 20 years, as far as I know. I heard sometimes, more than once, but just like in recent history, I heard that they said Dr. Martin Luther King was cheating on his wife, committing adultery. So I heard that. I said, where'd they get that from? So is that something they have been conveying about him ever since 60s? And people conveying that? Or is this something now just somebody started saying? Because if this is something that now somebody's just saying, that means there's a break in the chain here for this news. So then it's going to be suspect. I'm not going to say, turns out that Dr. Martin Luther King was such and such. As a Muslim, you're not going to go like that. Kafir, you won't be surprised for him. Just take, he hears something, he's just going to take it. And lack of anomaly. What does that mean? Lack of anomaly. And this is for hadiths of the Prophet ﷺ in particular. Very relevant here for the hadiths of the Prophet ﷺ. Sometimes you do have a report from a reliable source, but it's against a more reliable source. It is from a reliable source, and had it not been for a more reliable source, you would have relied on it. Because actually, this report from a reliable source, there doesn't seem to be anything wrong with it. There's nothing crazy about it. It's not off the walls or anything. There's nothing in and of itself that's wrong with it. It came from a reliable source, and the information itself is fine. But when you compare that information to information from more reliable source, there's a contradiction. So now you're going to what? Not take what came from the less reliable source, although it is reliable. It's not unreliable source. It's a reliable source, but not as reliable as the other source. So you're going to reject the one that's less reliable. What makes it less reliable? Like It's what one person said versus what many people said. It's unlikely that the one person is accurate while one reliable person is accurate and the many reliable people are inaccurate in this same report. That's unlikely. Not impossible, but unlikely. So then we're going to say these are many reliable people, and this is one reliable person, and they're contradicting each other. And many reliable people are stronger than one reliable person, so I'm going to take the stronger one and leave the weaker one. Or you have two reliable sources, but one is just stronger. Like one of them is a strong scholar, a strong, pious scholar. Let's say he has photographic memory, for example. A pious scholar with a photographic memory, he's telling you something. And a good brother who's reliable, he's telling you something. But he's not a pious scholar and he doesn't have a photographic memory. And he's saying something contrary to what the pious scholar with the photographic memory is telling you. So which one are you going to take? You're going to take from the pious scholar with the photographic memory because it's stronger. Although it is possible in the mind that the pious scholar with the photographic memory is mistaken here and that the other one is right. So one of the conditions of acceptance is that there's not an anomaly in the report. And the anomaly here means what I just told you. The anomaly means came from reliable source, but it's in conflict with more reliable source. Third condition is the lack of an effective defect. A defect in the report that is effective. Because not every defect in a report is effective. Effective means affects the reliability. Yani, it's possible to have a mistake in a report, but this mistake does not affect the reliability. Take that, that's important in detail for you. Don't say the existence of this mistake renders this report a lie altogether. No, not necessarily. Some defects in a report are ineffective. An example, yes, like if the one who's telling you is reporting to you from a trustworthy person. He told you, yes, Muhammad Ahmed told me this. You say, oh, Muhammad Ahmed, he's reliable. But really, it wasn't Muhammad Ahmed who told him. It was Ahmed Muhammad who told him. And he's reliable too. Whichever one told him, it's reliable. But he made a mistake, which one told him. So there's a defect here. But it has no effect because even if it were him, it would be reliable. It wasn't him, it was the other reliable one, though. This is an ineffective defect. Another condition is the precision of the narrator. That means he rarely makes mistakes. His mistakes are rare, not frequent. Some people, their mistakes are even 50% of the time, only 50-50. Like, some people, their mistakes are more than 50%. So that's very not accurate person. More than 50% of the time, he's mistaken. Yani, he reports, narrates to you inaccurately. Changes words around and other things. So when you talk to some people or they're asking you questions or telling you, a lot of times you need to say, tell me exactly the words, the exact words. Don't change the words on me. Some people, their mistakes are 50-50. Their mistakes versus their accuracies are 50-50. This is still too much, though. It's not good. And some people, their mistakes are less than 50%. Maybe they're accurate like 99% of the time, 98% of the time, 99.7% of the time. So high precision rate. This is a condition for a reliable narrator. This is a condition for a reliable narrator, his precision. But precision does not mean piety. So don't mix those. A person could be a scoundrel, but he's very precise, very accurate. It's not impossible. It's not even far-fetched. Some people are like that. They're not good people, but they are right a lot of times, most of the time. Accurate. And the fifth condition is the trustworthiness of the narrator. So that goes back to his religious standing, his piety, and his religiosity, his virtue according to religious standards. And this also, trustworthiness, is not precision. Very important for you. Because just because someone is a good Muslim, he's a worshipful, honest, good Muslim, he's not a liar. That doesn't mean he's precise, though. He could be way better than you, and he's always wrong. Yani always means a big percentage of the time, such that you can't rely on what he says. And the sixth one is a strengthener when needed. So when you say when needed means you don't always need a sixth condition. A strengthener when needed. So sometimes you have some news, and this news is questionable. Maybe it's true. You're not convinced, but you find something else that does strengthen this news, gives credence to this news. So now, without that thing, you wouldn't have relied on this news, but because of that outside thing, like you heard it from another route, then now you're going to say, now I know that news was actually right, because I heard it from this way too, from a whole nother route. Or something else, like an incident that happened. So you say, so that was true. And so then on the flip side, there are reasons for rejection. These are the conditions for acceptance. So why would you reject some news? Those reasons return back to interruption in the chain, a gap in the chain. Like what I just told you about how some people said about Martin Luther King. For me, I don't know. For me, there's a big gap in the chain there. Where this news came from. And even some of the ways I heard that's very not reliable. Maybe all of the ways I heard that. Or negative criticism of the narrator. But this interruption in the chain, Yani, so many people overlook this because they don't think about a chain of conveyance. The non-Muslims, they don't think about the chain of conveyance. That's why they accept from their news outlets to say, anonymous reporters told us, anonymous sources told us, or just our sources told us, and they have no names. A chain's severance may be obvious or not. How's it going to be obvious that the chain is severed? Because the one who's reporting has no connection, did not meet the one he's reporting from. He did not meet the one he's reporting from. Well, I'll give you another example. Some people claimed, and this is only from my own perspective, so maybe some of you have knowledge that I don't have. But for me, some people claim that there's what they call them, Mandingo fighters, the Mandingo fighters. They said that back when they had slaves, they had the Mandingo fighters. So you might say, when did you hear about that? You say, I just heard about it in 2010 or something like that. 2010, you never heard about it? Never heard about it. Isn't it crazy? So, did you check it? Did you trace it back? Did you, or you just, you accepted the fact that somebody told you something and that's it? Yeah, it's a big gap. There's hundreds of years of some news you never heard about. Now all of a sudden something known. So a chain severance may be obvious or might not be obvious. Severance will be obvious when there's no connection between the reporter and who he's reporting from. And it's known that there's, like, for example, generations between them, or that they never met. Or it might not be obvious because the one who's reporting from the other, he's a contemporary of his, or he's from the same town, or maybe they actually did meet. So it's not obvious, it's not clear that there's an interruption in the chain here, but there could be. So that's when you're going to need to be a skilled scholar to be able to determine some things like that. And the severance in the chain might be from the beginning of the chain or its end. The beginning of the chain is the source of the information is closest to you. That's the beginning. The beginning of the chain is the source of the information that's closest to you. The end of the chain is where the information stops at. So there could be an interruption at the beginning of the chain, or it could be an interruption at the end of the chain. And it might be one narrator at a time or consecutive narrators. One narrator is missing only, or there could be more than one, but not in a row. Or it could be consecutive narrators are missing from the chain. All of this, as you can perceive, inshallah, is greatly summarized from Science of Hadith. So you're just getting only like the cream, just to be a tool for you as a layman, a Muslim layman who's getting some knowledge that's going to give him an advantage in his life. And a report might be rejected due to negative criticism of the narrator. Not a breakage in the chain, not an interruption in the transmission, but a negative criticism of the narrator. Something's wrong with the one who's telling the report. His person may be unknown. Yani, he's an unknown person. That's a negative criticism. Who is he? Or his reliability may be unknown. You know who he is, but you don't know his reliability. You don't know his capability. You don't know his competence. Or he may be frequently mistaken, like we said already. Or he might be delusional. Delusional means he swears he's right, but he's wrong. He thinks he's right. Yani, he would swear that he's right, as if he saw it, as if he heard it, but he didn't. So that's what it means, he's delusional. This could happen even to a good person. But so if it happens to somebody one time, for example, then you could just say, yeah, it happens. But if somebody is like that, then khalas, he's not reliable. If that's his usual case, then he's not reliable. Or he might have a bad memory. Or he might be a major sinner currently. Or accused of lying. Accused of lying. Doesn't mean he is a liar. Sometimes even a person is suspected of being a liar, so you're not going to take from him. Doesn't mean he is a liar. Or he might even be a known fabricator. Then you're for sure not going to take from him. The Hafiz, that's Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, he summarized all these cases into two categories. One which questions the narrator's precision, and one which questions his trustworthiness. So, for example, And his person is unknown. So this questions his trustworthiness. His reliability is unknown. This questions his precision. He may be frequently mistaken. This questions his precision. Or delusional, or have a bad memory. This questions his precision. Or he might be a major sinner, or accused of lying, or even be a known fabricator. This questions his trustworthiness. So Ibn Hajar, he summarized all these cases into what questions the narrator's precision and what questions his trustworthiness. Wa subhanallahi wa bihamdi. Subhanallah. Allah knows best. We'll stop there. Any question? He said there's still an extra word you in the sentence if the issue that lacks evidence is determining the Qiblah on page 27. If the issue that lacks indisputable evidence is facing the Kaaba, such as an inability to see the building with your own eyes, then etc. May Allah give you a share of the reward of this booklet. Ameen. Until resurrection day. Ameen. طيب. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك